Hi, everyone, and welcome to Round the Horn. Our special guest today is recording engineer and producer Dan Grigsby. He's received 9 platinum records for his work with performers like Joe Cocker, Keith Richards, Kool the Gang, and Paula Abdul. Hi, Dan. How are you?
I'm good, Lee. How you doing? Long time no see.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm glad to have you on our show. And welcome to Round the Horn. It's a show that we do in talking to my musical friends about baseball. And everybody's got something in common, and it seems like baseball is it.
Yeah, couldn't get enough of it this year. It was a very strange season.
Right.
Very strange.
Sure, yeah. Well, congratulations to the Dodgers. This is being filmed right after the World Series has ended. And, well, better luck next year to everybody else.
Well, if it's any consolation to anybody, the Dodgers were a New York team at one time.
That's right.
Just saying.
Right. And they still have a lot of New York fans that love the Dodgers.
I remember there was one of the things our mutual friend Steve Schreger once told me. He said, and Steve, as we know, is a die-hard Yankee fan.
Absolutely.
And he said, well, one of the reasons why he dislikes the Mets is because he felt that there was a cheap shot that they took the Dodgers colors and the Giants and mixed it together
to create the Mets, right? Well, that's a little bit of history that some people don't even realize when they see the blue and orange of the New York Mets, that it's actually the combination of the old colors of the New York teams.
That's right. How cool that must have been at one time to have 3 baseball teams right here in the metropolitan area.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, what we're hearing these days as rumors that eventually expansion is going to happen. And they're talking about a 3rd team for this area.
Really?
So I don't know whether, the Phillies are going to like it, or the Yankees are going to like it, or the Mets are going to like it. But yeah, there's talk about that, as well as cities like Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Oklahoma City, and Nashville seems to be at the top of the list these days. So it's going to be interesting in the near future. Everybody loves baseball, that's for sure. It's popular all over the world.
Yeah.
They're thinking actually of a team that is going to be based in London.
Really?
Yeah, and a team in Hawaii. Can you imagine?
So they're going to play with cricket bats in London, or what?
Well, my last trip to London was way back in the 1980s. But going to Regent's Park, I think it was. I'm trying to think what park it was. But there were people playing softball.
Cool.
And from what I understood, that anybody that was stationed in the military in England, they all had baseball fields there and continued to play, even though they were stationed overseas. Same thing with Germany. And there's actually a professional league in Italy.
Wow. I did not know.
And sometimes what they do is they'll take an American ball player, and then if they don't have an A or a vowel at the end of their name, they'll add it.
I remember having some Spanish-speaking friends as a kid, and I'd go over their house, and while you're waiting for your buddy to so you can go out, their parents would have on the radio, and they'd have the Spanish-speaking station on, and of course they'd be listening to the Yankees, and it would be like, high fly ball, like they would mix it up between English and
Sure,
Spanish.
yeah.
And I think the advertiser at the time was Rheingold. I just remember hearing this commercial, Spanish, and then Rheingold extra dry,
Well, let's get into some of your musical background. So give our viewers a little bit of your history.
Well, part of my, I recently actually got a master's degree in something called ethnomusicology, which is uh, which is like the anthropology of music, right?
Right.
Um, and my thesis had to do with uh, my, uh, my father was Native American, from the Blackfoot Nation, but
Okay.
part Blackfoot Indian. Um, on my father's mother's side. So part of my thesis had to do with Native American traditional music and the influence with the blues. I was always a blues fan. I got a very big blues education um, when I was young and went to Monmouth College. It wasn't a university yet. It was
Yeah,
Monmouth
right,
College,
exactly.
right?
Likewise.
Uh, and of course, meeting people like Steve and Billy Hector and Big Danny Gallagher. Oh, geez, Lance Larson. I mean, all these guys were blues fans, blues, rock, and pop fans. Billy, of course, hardcore. And Billy Lilly, well, amazing harp player.
Sure.
So I got a good blues education. Um, as I looked into the blues more, I discovered that there were a lot of mixed race blues musicians that were, uh, if not half, more than half Native American, which nobody ever knew about. And of course, the underlying story here is what's known as native invisibility. All the things that indigenous people contribute to culture and to society usually goes unnoticed or unmentioned. Often because indigenous people are memorialized. You know, they'll put a statue up or put your face on a nickel, but that is a negative connotation in that it suggests to modern society that you are extinct or that you know, you're
Sure.
gone,
Right. Exactly.
days gone
Right.
by, which of course is not true. Um, and of course, I discovered that Charlie Patton, who is known as the grandfather of the Delta blues, was Choctaw Indian. Um,
Right. Okay.
and a few years ago, a film came out called Rumble: Indians That Rocked the World, and Little Steven is in it. Little Steven's in it. Taj Mahal is in it. George Clinton, Kedmo, lots of musicians, and they all talk about the influence that a traditional Indian music and Indian musicians had on blues, jazz, and rock and roll. Um, so part of my education, that thread, that interest actually began with my interaction and my experience in Asbury Park in the mid 70s. Moved to Long Branch. I think it was about 76. Um, I remember getting there, Monmouth College, then Monmouth. Now it's Monmouth University. Had a radio station, WMCX, but it was only on like a few hours every other day, which bugged me because I was a big music fan, always a big music fan. So I went up and introduced myself when I heard it was on the air, and got involved. And I think less than a month or so after I got involved, we were on almost 24 hours a day. They wouldn't let us go on the overnight. The school said that we couldn't, but we could go up to like midnight. And of course, there was the station was set up with a group of control rooms with glass windows, and they were in a sort of a circle, and in the middle was a conference room. So I said, do we ever use that conference room? And they said, no, not really. I said, let's move all the furniture out, and we'll set bands up in there, and we'll do live stuff with bands. And one of the first bands that had come up was Cahoots, right?
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And next thing you know, all the bands wanted to come up and play, and we did that. And even um, Willie Rush, who at the time was playing guitar with Southside, who, by the way, I love Bruce Springsteen, of course. Born and raised in New Jersey. I'm a Jersey boy. I live in New York, but Jersey boy through and through. Love Bruce, but I always felt like Southside Bruce has got this great rock and roll voice, but to me, Southside was a crooner.
Yes, exactly.
A classic crooner. I love Southside's voice, the way he turns a phrase, his intonation. I mean, what a blue-eyed soul. Forget about it. I mean, the guy, you know, all and as later on, when I began after college, after Monmouth, I was lucky enough to get a job at a recording studio in West Orange, New Jersey, called the House of Music.
Right. Yep.
No longer there, but I actually got to work as an assistant engineer on 2 Southside Johnny records. The second one being "At Least We Have Shoes."
Sure. With John Rollo.
Yep, with John Rella, and he did an amazing cover of "Walk Away, Renee," which I still feel is my best version. I mean, I love the classic, the original, but Southside just kills that tune.
Yeah, he
I
makes
mean,
it his own.
he
Sure.
does. So yeah, so my musical education was really uh, uh, regenerated and rejuvenated with my time down there in Asbury and in Long Branch in the 70s. Of course, East Street Band was blowing up. Um, there were so many great bands back there, weren't there, Lee? I mean, you had
Absolutely. Sure. Yeah.
the Shots, the Shakes. You know, these guys were amazing. I always, you know, I teach now, and when we talk about music history and about music as an art form with students, um, things come up like, you know, the Beatles and how and Motown in Detroit, you know, and how a lot of times in these impoverished, excuse the phrase, um, areas, because I grew up in Newark, right, Newark, New Jersey. You had
Sure.
three
Yeah.
choices. Three choices. You could become a cop, you could become a criminal, or you could become a musician.
Right.
3 career paths to choose. You know, you could work for the mafia, the police department, or
Or
just
the
start
Four
a band,
Seasons.
or the Four Seasons, right? um, so we talk about that, you know, and we talk about how Liverpool was a really dark and dank place, and these Ford lads managed. That was the way they crawled out of that existence
Sure.
through
Yes.
their art
Right.
form.
Right.
And I feel like Asbury had that same thing going on back then, you know, late 60s, early 70s, a lot of guys, a way to make it and to, you know, change your what your experience was to get it into a band and start a band. And these were great players, you know, really great players. I admire all those guys from back then, you
Yeah,
know.
and still are actually. You know, Billy Hector plays still a lot of times. Unfortunately, these past few months with the pandemic, it's really hurt a lot of people, and especially their live performances.
Yeah, it's the same thing in New York, you know. Every once in a while, you'll see somebody with a guitar or an electric keyboard set up on the sidewalk where they have some outdoor dining playing. But I think right now, a lot of the restaurants that would double as having food, drink, and entertainment um, are not considering the artists, the musicians right now. They're just trying to keep their heads above
Sure,
water, which
right.
is unfortunate, you know.
Yep.
Um, I think when things go south and things get bad, it's always the artists that jump out as first responders on the art front. You know,
Sure.
musicians and
Yep.
stuff like that. You know,
And what are you doing these days besides teaching?
I'm still doing some independent music production and engineering. Um, uh, a lot of it now I do in the box with Pro Tools. I'm a big Pro Tools advocate, love it. But you know, my heart's always back with that with analog tape. I still manage to stay in touch with a few of my engineer producer friends. Jim Bonifant, who now lives in Australia, who is the producer and engineer for Kool the Gang, which one of the founding members, Khalees Bell, passed away last
Yes,
month.
we did a tribute to him on our Radio Jersey radio show.
Yeah, he was a good friend, and I actually produced and engineered a record for his son Rashid, uh, which was a really good record. So I'm still doing that. Currently, I'm going to be over the Christmas break. I'm going to be mixing a 5-song EP with a young woman who is from Brooklyn. Her name is Jessie Grace,
Mm-hmm.
and she was primarily a hip hop singer. And then we sort of got together, and I put the bug in her ear of like, you know what, we should go with playing with live musicians, you know, and got some players from around the city. This was before COVID, of course, when we actually did the tracking.
Right.
Um, and I really wanted to kind of push it in a direction of like an Amy Winehouse thing.
Right. Okay.
Um, so we did 4 original tunes and one cover. I had her cover the Temptations. How I Wish It Would Rain.
Oh, great. Great.
Which she kills that. So during the winter Christmas break, I'm going to try to get that finished. And all the tracking is done, so we're going to get that mixed and see what happens in the new year. Maybe we get it out.
Right.
Fingers
Now let's
crossed.
get to baseball.
Baseball. All right, wait, hang on.
New Jersey.
Hang on. Baseball. Hang on. Here we go. I'm prepared.
All right. Right. I mean, you came from Newark, where the Ballantine beer distillery and brewery was located. And that's one of the things that I remember going to the old Yankee Stadium, seeing that big
There we go.
Ballantine beer. Oh, there we go.
I saved that image just for you right now.
Great.
Yeah, the Ballantine beer. Yeah.
Ballantine beer sign out in the outfield. And I had a great chance to work with Mel Allen once doing some radio commercials.
Oh, wow.
He was unbelievable. It was one take Mel. You spent more time talking and being introduced to him. And then he goes in, he cold reads it first and then check the mic and boom, he's done.
A natural, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Those were the days back then.
I remember the Ballantine Brewery right by the Parkway, the Garden State Parkway. You drive by it, and it had that big bottle tower.
Yes, right.
Yeah. I had a cousin, God rest him, he passed, but I had a cousin who worked there. And the brewery was running 24/7. I mean, it was open all the time. And so you were on the night shift or the morning shift. And they had a bar. So the guys on their break would go into the Ballantine bar and they'd be drinking Ballantine beer and go back to work. I'm like, what a great job.
I remember hearing those stories, for sure. So Yankee fan, right?
Oh, yeah. Through the good times and the bad.
Yeah, there's a lot of changes that are going to be made soon, that's for sure.
Yeah, this was a funky year.
We hear the verse.
It was a funky year. I really thought we were going to do something this year, and I said, so many teams are going to be quarantined and be out of it. Get the deadwood out of the way, go right to the series.
Sure.
But
what year do you think you remember your first game?
I'd have to say maybe it was in the 60s. My father, although he grew up down south, when it came to baseball, he was a Yankee fan. When it came to football, he was a Baltimore Colts fan. Where he grew up, there was no team. There was no team in Washington, D.C. He grew up in the southern part of the state of Virginia, but he was a Yankee fan. And, of course, I loved Whitey Ford, who we just recently lost him.
That's right.
Whitey Ford, Mickey Mantle. I mean, what kid didn't grow up, idolizing Mickey Mantle,
Right.
But I also was a big Phil Rizzuto fan. I didn't really get to see him play because it was before my time, before my interest in baseball. But I loved him as a broadcaster and as a character.
Yep.
I always would have thought it would have been great to get Phil Rizzuto and Steve Schrager in the same room. that would have been such a great conversation right there.
We had Steve on as one of our guests recently. He's just the classic.
He is. I love the guy. He's like a brother to me,
Yeah, exactly. And actually, former guest Danny Roselli from the Mylars tells the story of pumping gas to Rizzuto in his car in Hillside.
Yeah, I was when I first got out, left Monmouth College, I got a job with a buddy installing carpeting. And we were in, I think it was Montclair, somewhere around there. And we stopped at a deli to get lunch. And having a mental block. Oh my God.
So Rizzuto shows up, right?
No, not Rizzuto, but it ain't over till it's over. My God. The
Well,
catcher.
we'll continue that story later.
The catcher, the guy would say all the great sayings. It ain't over till it's over.
No, Yogi.
Yogi Berra, oh my God, I'm getting Alzheimer's or something.
Yeah,
So
right.
we're sitting there, and Yogi Berra walks into the deli.
Right. He lived in Upper Montclair.
Yeah, and I was like, it was like meeting a rock star. I'm standing next to him. He's paying. He's chatting with the guy behind the counter, and I'm like, I couldn't say anything. I couldn't
Sure.
say anything. And then he turns to walk out, and I was like, Yogi. And he just turned and waved and walked out. But I guess he got that a lot. But yeah. So yeah, Yogi was I liked the guys that were characters. They were more
Sure.
than baseball players. They were like unique characters.
Right.
Like what McEnroe would do for tennis. A lot of these guys would do for baseball.
Sure.
You know,
Jack
you wanted
Scarabella tells a lot of stories about the people he's met over the years through Buddy Rich. And a lot of it revolves around Berra and Rizzuto, and then he goes into Pepitone and a bunch of other guys. So yeah, it's amazing. I played an all-star game at Yankee Stadium, the old Yankee Stadium one time, and
wow.
we were in the it was a third clubhouse that they actually used for Bobby Richardson and his Sunday services. Because Bobby Richardson was a pastor. So he conducted on Sundays a service for all the ball players. And that was in this third separate clubhouse that they had for visitors and things like that.
In the old Yankee Stadium.
In the old Yankee Stadium, yeah. And Jack tells the stories of being Ron Guidry's drum teacher. And they're setting up drums underneath Yankee Stadium, and Guidry would go and play drums before he'd go out to the bullpen.
That's cool. It must have sounded cool under the stands.
Yeah, and there were 2 drum kits and a little speaker system, and Guidry would be practicing and taking lessons from Jack.
Wow.
So we're going to get Jack on in the near future because the stories he has are unbelievable.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Let me know. I want to see that one.
Yeah.
Sure.
And Jack has a CD out with a whole bunch of Yankees on it. And
no kidding.
He has one of the last, there's some spoken introductions to some of the songs, one of which is Rizzuto. And it was the last thing that Rizzuto did in any kind of recording.
Yeah, he had a couple of hits, right? I mean,
yeah, right.
I was working at House of Music when we did the Meatloaf records.
Oh, right, sure.
And when he came in to do the Paradise by the Dashboard Light.
Right. Okay, that must have been a great session.
Oh my God! And there was only just very few takes, and they just did because he was a natural. It was like he was at the baseball game.
That's right. Yeah. Well, those guys were pros. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I still remember as a kid, going to Yankee Stadium on the bus rides with the Little League and the Babe Ruth League, and getting the worst seats in the world because you were so far that the players looked like little ants. There was no chance of ever getting an autograph or anything like that. But it was still you were going to a cathedral.
See, I was lucky. I think one of my very first games at the stadium, I don't remember who the Yankees were playing, but I remember walking with the old man, and it was on not the field level, but the next level up.
Right.
And walking down that big corridor, and there's that big archway where you just see the sky until you got, and it was like you're walking into this sacred place. As you got there, it opened up, and there was the field, and the grass looked so green, and the stadium looked like it was glowing. It was like, whoa! It was like this epiphany. It was like a spiritual experience. You're like, wow! And you're a kid, and your eyes are big, and you got your stupid little Yankee, not unofficial Yankee hat on. It wasn't like an official Yankee, and stuck back on the back of your head.
Right.
A real feeling of like you were belonged to this big club.
Yeah.
I don't remember ever seeing anybody at the stadium, even when I was older as an adult. No, But as a kid, I don't remember ever hearing or seeing anybody at Yankee Stadium that was ever rooting for the other team.
No, right. That's
It always felt like everybody at the stadium, every single seat was filled with Yankee fans,
Yankee
and
fan.
everybody was rooting for the Yankees. You know?
And there was always one guy in the section that always was the big mouth.
Yeah, that was me.
But Danny, we're running out of time. Unfortunately, we could go on and on and on like we do with all the other guests. And it's great to reminisce about the old days with Yankee baseball. We really appreciate you coming by and taking some time
I
out.
appreciate being on. If I can squeeze in one story for just
Go ahead.
1
Sure.
minute.
Yeah.
Around 1999 or so, my wife and I, at the time, not my wife, but my girlfriend, we were taking the train out to the beach, New York Beach, not down the Jersey Shore. And it was crowded. And this older woman was standing next to us. So I give my seat to her. She sits down next to my wife and she asks, "What are we doing? What do we do?" And my wife, explains that she owns at the time she owned a rock and roll bar called the Luna Lounge on Ludlow Street. Now she's a yoga teacher. And I said, "Well, I'm a recording engineer and I work with famous people." We talked and she said, "Oh, that's so funny. My son is in the public eye, and do you run into the situation where, if there's a big show or something big going on in the artist, you have to sort of cater to them and be superstitious and don't get them upset and all that stuff?" I said, "Well, yeah, you don't want artists to get upset before they go out and perform. You want them to be comfortable." And I said, well, who is your son? What does he do?" "Oh, he plays baseball." I said, "Oh, really? Well, what team?" "The Yankees." "The Yankees? Who's your son?" "David Cohn."
Oh.
David Cohn. So I met his mom. I gave David, if you ever see this, I gave your mom a seat back in the 90s so she could sit on the train. But anyway, thank you, Lee, for having me on.
Our thanks to special guest Dan Grigsby today for spending some time with us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you all next week. Take care. Good night.